Ontario parliamentarians razz the creationists and a new human ancestor fossil. This is Genesis Week. And a welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the origins controversy made possible by you, the supporters of Core Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education. Excellence in pirate broadcasting coming to you all across Canada and the US from behind the dumpster at the grocery store here. We continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and we give glory to our creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can just punch in genesisweek.com, where you can subscribe to get extras like Crevo rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. I don't normally get into politics, as this show is devoted to science. But when politicians start hauling out what they think is science to criticize others for questioning evolution, well, I just gotta get into the fray. It all started here in Ontario with the introduction of highly controversial new sex education programs intended to introduce very explicit sexual material to very young children, which has garnered the ire of many very concerned parents here in Ontario. During heated debate over the sex ed curriculum, the lack of consultation with parents was brought up by the Conservative opposition, including the choice for parents to have their children opt out of the sex education program. This prompted taunts from the Liberal members, asking if Conservative MPP Rick Nichols might want to give parents the choice of opting their children out of evolution teaching in the schools as well. Nichols responded with, "That was not a bad idea." Nichols was then grilled by reporters and other members of the caucus about his beliefs regarding creation or evolution. What happened over the next week provided a profound and ironic example of exactly what our education system has taught. Liberal leader Kathleen Wynne jumped all over Nichols' comments, saying, "I would have expected, quite frankly, that everyone in the legislature would have had a firm belief in the science that we teach in our schools, and certainly that I believe in." Wynne made the glaring and common error of equating science and evolution. Science is based upon observation of the natural world, observations that are testable, repeatable, measurable, and predictable. Evolution is none of these things. What observations have been made, what tests have been run, seeing as how evolution occurred in the unobservable past? How is evolution predictable? Every present-day observation is either the opposite of evolutionary predictions or of no help whatsoever to evolution. The founding fathers of all the modern sciences were Bible-believing creationists, and many modern, very successful scientists are Bible-believing creationists. So, obviously, evolution and science are not one and the same. Don't go using the two words interchangeably, please. What's also interesting is her comment about the evolution, not science, taught in our schools is fact. Let's do a poll. I'll bet 99% of science educators will have never before heard the following facts. Natural selection, if actually allowed to run its full course, as taught in our science textbooks, would actually produce the opposite of evolution. It would invert the evolutionary tree of life by selecting the far more fit bacteria and weeding out the higher, more vulnerable life forms like mammals. Weeding out is a nice term for killing them off. Bacteria reproduce with the much simpler, far more reliable asexual reproduction. They have a reproduction rate many magnitudes above that of mammals. Bacteria can survive in incredibly harsh environments, survive extremes of temperatures that no mammal could survive, and can survive without food or water far longer than any mammal. So if natural selection really was the driving force behind evolution, we should never have evolved past the bacteria. I go into this in detail in Crevo Rant number 110, Natural Selection. Natural selection is obviously not evolution, so why is it taught as Darwin's hallmark in our textbooks and science classes? The horse series, an alleged fossil sequence of small land animals evolving into the modern horse, is still taught in our textbooks and museums. That fossil sequence has been found completely reversed in South America, with the modern horse found in rock layers dated older than the Heracrotherium. Even evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould acknowledged this should not be used as evidence for evolution. So why is it in our textbooks? Vestigial organs are alleged to be useless leftovers from our evolutionary ascent. All of the vestigial organs presented as proof of evolution have been found to have purpose, such as the human appendix and the alleged hip bones found in whales. In fact, many of these organs turned out to be crucial organs and not useless at all. For example, the whale pelvic bones are part of the reproduction system. They are small, disconnected from the rest of the skeleton, have no relationship at all with hips, and without those bones, whales would go extinct. So why are vestigial organs still being taught in our textbooks and science classes as proof of evolution? Speaking of whale sex, it is also very interesting to note what is not being taught in our evolution courses. Things like the evolution of sexual reproduction. Now, this is especially interesting seeing as how the liberals are trying so hard to push through this sex education program, sexualizing our children. Why do they not also insist on including the evolution of sex in the evolution curriculum? Well, I'll tell you why. Because sexual reproduction is fatal to evolution. Think about it. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of radically different reproduction systems. Fish were supposed to have evolved into land-walking creatures, yet fish typically fertilize their eggs externally. Land creatures fertilize eggs internally, and for good reason. Land creatures have a number of different internal fertilization regimes, none of which are compatible with each other. Now remember, this is the reproductive system. It has to work the first time, every time, or it is the extinction of the species and extinction of any evolution. So not only does evolution have to do the absolute impossible of making radical changes to the organism's reproduction system without annihilating the species, it must make radical changes in both the male and female reproductive systems at the same time and the same place on planet Earth. You can't have Lucy evolving in Africa and have Mr. Lucy evolving the appropriate gear even 100 years later. That would be the extinction of the species and evolution. You also can't have Mr. Lucy evolving over in South America. Evolving sexual reproduction is flat out impossible. Now, scientifically speaking, if you don't believe me, just look at the science behind reproduction. Not just human reproduction, but animal reproduction too, as there's concerns about the extinction of species which can't reproduce. Extensive fertility studies are ongoing, all because very minor flaws developing in reproductive systems lead to infertility. This is how fragile the system is. See Crevo Rant number 13, Ian's sex video, for more details on just how impossible the evolution of sex is. Antibiotic resistance is presented in our textbooks as clear proof of evolution. In fact, comments on YouTube repeated this claim just last week. But wait a minute. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria were around before antibiotics were invented. We know this because of the discovery of the frozen corpses from the Franklin expedition in the Canadian Arctic. The bacteria found in the gut of the doomed sailors, buried in the frozen ground before antibiotics were invented, were resistant to modern antibiotics. So why is antibiotic resistance taught as powerful proof of evolution in our textbooks? Obviously, antibiotics did not produce antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They did not evolve. Homology is another common argument seen in our evolutionary textbooks. Homology is the similarity between organisms, say the bones of the human arm, the flipper of the whale, and the wing of the bat. It is argued that this is because they all evolved from a common ancestor. But wait, my 1989 Dodge Maxi van, which I so affectionately refer to as my chick magnet, has the same transmission as the General Lee. Now, obviously, it's not because of a common ancestor, but rather it is because of a common designer, Dodge Motor Company. People seeing my robotic creations have often spontaneously said they recognize my handiwork. They recognize the different robots as having a common designer. In like fashion, homology in organisms can also be interpreted as evidence of a common designer. The same being who designed the arm of the human also used similar concepts in designing the bones and construction of the flipper of the whale or the wing of the bat. Why is this so hard to believe? It's especially interesting in that the evolutionary researchers have even admitted that where the bones are homologous, the genes that produce, say, this bone in the human are completely different than the genes that produce the homologous bone in the whale, for instance. The bones are interpreted as homologous, but the genetics are not. So did they come from a common ancestor or not? If they had, then the genes should also be homologous. Again, even the late Stephen Jay Gould admitted that homology was just as adequately interpreted as evidence of a common designer and was not exclusively explained by a common ancestor. In fact, I would suggest that the fact that the bones are similar but the genes are not is good evidence against the common ancestor theory, and thus the common designer theory is the only one left standing. Science educators, tell me, were you aware of any of these facts? Let us know. Send us a tweet on Twitter with the hashtag ScienceEducatorsForTruth, or drop us an email at comments@genesisweek.com, or drop us a line on our Facebook page, facebook.com/GenesisWeekTV. How long have you been a science educator? Had you heard any of these facts before? Why are these facts not in the evolution section of our science textbooks? Or have you found them in the textbooks that you use? Please write us and let us know. I'm fairly confident that 99% of science educators have never heard any of these facts. I'm fairly confident in saying that they are unaware that they are teaching erroneous science. This raises the ugly question, why not? Well, I'll tell you why. They're teaching it because that's what they learned in our education system. Our education system still mandates these teachings, so they teach it again to the next generation. The errors perpetuate themselves in a bizarre circle with religious protection. The reason I say religious protection is exemplified in the reactions of even our honorable members of parliament who, instead of addressing the science, immediately stooped to condescending and insulting remarks towards anyone who would dare to question teaching evolution. Such were the remarks of Health Minister Eric Hoskins. We had one member of the PC party questioning whether we should even be teaching evolution in schools. I can't even begin to imagine what may be coming next. Perhaps we never landed on the moon. Landing on the moon was based on true science, scientific and engineering research that is observable, repeatable, predictable, and testable. Evolution is none of these things, so the honorable member has stooped to condescending non-sequiturs. I'll bet the health minister still thinks that bacterial resistance is proof of evolution. The ministers probably don't know any of the facts I pointed out, with the exception, of course, for the Honorable Rick Nichols, which may explain why he said the things he did about opting out of evolution education in the science classroom. But why do these members of parliament not know any of these facts I shared? Because they are a product of our education system. A system that is teaching gross errors and never allows the questioning of the science, falsely so called, behind evolution. The only ones questioning evolution are the creationists, who are actually performing good science and asking questions about the interpretation of evidence. That's what scientists are supposed to do. Opting out of the evolutionary teaching and the highly controversial new sex education, for that matter, should certainly be a parental choice, seeing as how facts, such as I've mentioned, are mysteriously absent from the science teaching. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't teach evolution, I just think it should be taught accurately and scientifically, complete with evidence for and against it, including competing theories. Like any good science should be taught, seeing as how it's being taught in the science classes and all. I had a pile of intrepid viewers send me articles that came out on a new human ancestor, allegedly pushing back human history 400,000 years. Here we go again. All the headlines said what they usually say every time an alleged human ancestor is found. Jawdropping, oldest human fossil fills in a 2.8 million year old gap in evolution. Why the oldest human fossil ever discovered changes everything. Fresh fossil studies rewrite the history of humanity's genus Homo. The skull that chews up theories of human ancestry. 2 new fossils just rewrote the timeline of human evolution. Here's what it looks like now. There's many more that all say the same thing. Isn't it interesting that every time a new fossil is found, it rewrites the evolutionary tree, yet at the time, that tree is presented as infallible truth and proof of evolution? Same old story. Fine, let's take a look at this fossil. The focus is part of a jawbone that was found. The jaw was attributed to Homo habilis, whose original holotype was discovered in the 60s and nicknamed the Tool Man because of stone tools that were found in the area and assumed to have been made by Homo habilis. But part of the big deal here is the possible evolution from Lucy to man. Now, you remember Lucy, the very famous fossil of our alleged half-ape, half-human ancestor. Well, here's the skeleton. But what's not shown here is the fossil knee that was found 2.5 kilometers away from the skeleton and 70 meters, some 230 feet below Lucy in the rock layers. Would you assume that knee had anything to do with the Lucy skeleton? When forensic scientist Owen Lovejoy saw the knee, he said,
"When Don brought the Hadar knee back from Ethiopia, he brought it over to my house and laid it out on the living room carpet. And I knew instantly that was a human knee."
So, clearly this was proof that humans were around before Lucy. So obviously Lucy could not possibly be our ancient ape-like ancestor, right? Guess again, because according to the evolutionary timescale, this knee could not possibly have belonged to a human. So it had to have belonged to Lucy. Problem was, as Lovejoy himself noted, Lucy's hip was too chimp-like. She could not have walked upright like the knee demanded. So Lovejoy actually reconstructed Lucy's hip, and voila! Lucy's hip suddenly looks an awful lot like a human hip. Imagine if a creationist had taken one of the Paluxy fossil human footprints like this one, where you can see a couple of toe impressions in a footprint on the same rock layer as dinosaur footprints. That creationist knew this was a human footprint. So they then took a Dremel and just reconstructed the footprint so it was more obviously human. The outrage that would happen within the evolutionary community would be very loud and justifiable. Evolutionists would call it fraud. And I think rightfully so, don't you? So why is it then that Lovejoy can modify Lucy's hip bone with a Dremel, and it's not called fraud, but it's called science? Well, I know what I would call it. What word would you describe Lovejoy's work with? Tweet it with the hashtag LucyLovejoy, or email us your opinion, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. By the way, these fossil footprints are the original photographs of 2 separate fossil footprints. Neither one was carved or modified in any way. In fact, the first one has been eroded by some 50 years of river erosion, and was the next footprint in the trail after this one. The trail is still visible today, and the hole from which the track was removed over 50 years ago. Lucy is truly a half-ape, half-human skeleton. They used a human knee combined with a chimpanzee skeleton, then modified the hip to make it appear more like a human hip. Trying to trace an evolutionary line from Lucy to modern man is like trying to interpret the evolutionary line from the unicorn to the modern horse. But get a load of what habilis research team leader Brian Vilmore said to the BBC. Could Lucy's kind, which belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis, have evolved into the very first primitive humans? Well, that's what we are arguing, said Professor Vilmore. So you can see the reliability of the interpretations here. But coming back to the habilis jaw, the researchers argued that it was too long and narrow to belong to the human line, the line of Homo. Yet in 2013, we reported on a paper which discussed the Dmanisi skeletons, which had shown more variation in their skulls, which were believed to be all from the same time and people group, than the variation between the species of Homo. This showed that the variation between skulls had nothing to do with evolution, because all of the Homo species were all one. Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis, and yes, even Homo habilis were all one species. Homo sapiens, or modern man. There is no evolution here, even with the reconstruction of this new jaw, as the variation falls within what we see in even modern man. Stick around, we'll be back in just 1 minuto.
The Complete Creation video series is just that, an exhaustive look at the science, philosophy, and theology behind the creation-evolution debate. In this 12 DVD series, Ian Juby starts off with a 1-hour presentation for the children in God's little creation. He then follows up with almost 11 hours of lecturing for the adults, as he walks you through the debate starting at its surprising history, and examining the evidence from biology, geology, physics, paleontology, and archaeology. Chances are, any question you have about the creation-evolution debate is answered in this video series. With open captions for the hearing impaired, the series is both entertaining and educational. There are also free resources, such as question and answer and proctor sheets for homeschoolers. You can now get the entire set as an instant digital download or on DVD. Visit Ian's bookstore today.
Woohoo! Mail for me? Blair Steven wrote in on our Facebook page. Ian, this week's show fully demonstrates that you don't understand evolution. You actually state that evolution doesn't predict extinctions? What do you think survival of the fittest means? Extinction is a central prediction of evolution. Please admit you are lying or don't understand basic concepts. Thanks for writing in. I like how you worded it in sort of a have you stopped beating your wife yet question. Well, rather than lying or not understanding basic concepts, it would appear that actually you misunderstood what I said. What I said was, and I quote, I could provide dozens and dozens of examples of fossil life that has faithfully reproduced after its kind. The other thing you see in the fossil record is extinction. Extinction does not help evolution one iota. Evolution is supposed to be the origin of the species, not the extinction of the species. I never said evolution wouldn't predict extinctions. I said extinctions are of no help to evolution. Now, what did I mean by that? Well, present-day genetic and breeding studies have shown just how impossible macroevolution is. So, contrary to all known science, according to evolutionary dogma, organisms had to have somehow changed over time to evolve from bacteria to the higher organisms, such as fishes, for example. But let's take a look at dog breeding. Dog breeds all come from a mutt, from which dog breeders unnaturally selected specific traits and bred those dogs with that specific trait so that they only produce dogs with that specific trait. what they did was remove genetic diversity from the breed. These dogs can no longer produce dogs like this one because they've lost the genetic diversity. So now, let's wipe out all of these dogs except for this one, which was the only one who survived the mass extinction event. That dog can now only produce its own breed of dog. We just lost all of this diversity, never to be reclaimed again. You cannot produce a non-dog animal from a dog, nor can you produce a dog from a non-dog animal. After a mass extinction, evolution can no longer even produce the dogs that were around before the mass extinction. So mass extinction is of absolutely no help to evolution. Who cares if mass extinction leaves more room in the biosphere for the animals who survived? It's irrelevant. Okay, I am way over time. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now. I hope you'll join us again next Genesis week. Remember, you can send in your comments, questions, hate mail, and your playoff tickets to the Toronto Maple Leaf games to us in a number of ways. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com, or you can send us a tweet at genesisweek. Or you can go to genesisweek.com, find the most recent show, and post a comment there. Or you can head on over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/GenesisWeekTV and leave a comment there. Remember those words of warning and comfort from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." We'll see you on the flip side.
We are a viewer-supported program and need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us, and if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program can do so online at ianjuby.org/donations, and thank you for your support.